Hello, bonsai friends. This is Evan Pardue of Underhill Bonsai, and welcome to episode 29 of Little Things for Bonsai People, the podcast. And today I'm joined by one of my co-hosts, Mike Lane of Kitsune Bonsai. What's going on, Mike?
Hey guys, how's it going?
And also joined by a very special guest today, Sergio Cuan. How's it going, Sergio?
Great, man. Good
Awesome.
to see you, and thank you for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for being on the podcast. It's
Yeah.
going to be a really fun one. But before we get started, I do need to mention that our podcast is sponsored by our amazing patrons. We have a list of patrons called our Bonsai Best Buds. We always read the list off here to our $5 patrons, starting with Tori Solis, Warehouse Rat, Boyd Snellgrove, Ricky Ruins, Joshua Bentley, Snappy Chappers. Here we go. Ryan Giordano. You're welcome. I had to look it up on Google pronunciation to get that right. Joel Jenkins, Justin Knight, Backyard Bonsai Australia, the ladies at the flower market, Taylor Peacock, Chase Pertwee, Vicky Off. Thank you for being Bonsai Best Buds and supporting the show. Every little thing counts. Every little thing helps. Make sure you share, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And also, I need to go ahead and just drop in really quick about our editor, Matt O'Donnell. Go to mattodonnell.com. Check out his website. He's a music producer and bass player out of Nashville. He cleans up our podcast, makes us sound really good, really smooth. Makes us just, he's making this podcast happen. I, can't be more thankful for Matt. So thanks, Matt. Yeah, like I said, go check out his website. His Instagram's the same thing. At Matt O'Donnell, O'Donnell. Go check him out. Anyway, so let's get into it. So Sergio, how is it going on your part of the world?
Going well, man. I just ending my spring madness. I just repotted the last one about a week and a half ago, and I'm kind of happy to take a little bit of a break. To be honest with you, it's just been mad. It's been I think colder than average here up here. It's been cold. It's been wet, and been doing the bonsai shuffle, as they say, in and out, in and out. And I've been doing that almost for close to 2 months. So now is finally all the trees are in the garden. I'm getting my garden all set up or finishing setting it up. And like I said, I finished repotting the last one a week and a half ago. So very happy to, yeah. So I'm waiting.
Nothing's really bud launched yet?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Any good bud launch? Like, yeah, good extensions on your buds yet?
Oh yeah. I'm getting quite a bit of extension, although some of the trees have been a little bit on the slow side just because it's been a little bit cold. But now it's warming up, and now some of the trees are just kind of taking off, which is great to see.
Yeah, it's been a pretty commonplace for the podcast, especially this year because the weather's been really roller coaster as far as temperatures go. Even in Louisiana, we had an oddly cool spring. I mean, it's 90 degrees today, but our spring started out pretty interesting. I mean, it was 60 degrees and going down to 50 degrees at night, just staying there for about a month or so. But yeah, like we said, we always talk about the weather on this podcast. It's directly related to bonsai, so we understand.
Yeah, but, that's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, spring's always a rough time to kind of get caught up on everything. And now that I'm traveling, I'm following up on some of the customers you were working with too. And so I'm learning a little bit about deciduous trees that I've never even worked on. So it's been an interesting spring. Evan and I were just doing a big repotting session in Louisiana.
Yeah. Like this is just like that perfect moment to do tropicals right now. And I learned that, and this is from you, Mike, that tropicals are best done like right now, especially your stronger ones.
Yeah, like we were talking about before, it's my opinion. I just like to have the extra time to recover them.
It's a valid opinion. Like that makes a lot of sense. I mean, for strong stuff like the ficuses or the buttonwoods and the primnas and all the other stuff that is definitely going to put on a lot of good growth. You got, like you said, you got that about 8 months, left of growing season. I might as well just get a head start on it. So for you, Sergio, you're located in New Jersey, if I remember right.
I am in the northwest corner of the state, to be exact. Yeah. So, I think I'm 6A, growing zone 6A. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So your zone is just a little bit like more in line with how it would be because I know in New York and around that like in the New England states, it's always just really mild. Even the summers there, right?
We can get up to like, I mean, it's unusual, but maybe sometimes we can get up to like 95
Mm,
in maybe July or August. But I would say average temperature here would be probably around 85 to 88 degrees, something like that.
yeah.
Around August, July, we may get a stretch where we may hit 90, 93 degrees, something like that. But
Mm,
luckily, we have not yet have gone up to like 117, like the Pacific Northwest had, like I think 2 years ago, which was insane. I'm hoping that we don't. So,
Yeah. Where are you where are you from originally, Sergio? Are you
yeah, originally I'm Cuban,
Oh, no
uh,
kidding.
and believe it or not, I don't have a single tropical. You
No
would think.
way. Oh, come on.
I'm building up to that, Mike.
We gotta fix that. Yeah, we gotta
Yes.
fix that.
Yeah, but I'm Cuban and I grew up in Spain and again I've been in the United States for quite a while now, but mainly I grew up in Spain. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
I have one more follow-up question that I'm chomping at the bit to ask is
sure.
how somebody told me that you were just self-taught mostly. Is that true?
That is true. That is true. I am self-taught. It is also true. I've taken like I took an intensive with Bill Albanese back in 2015, I believe.
Yeah.
And I had Bjorn here. I've of course I watch Ryan Neal's live stream. So of course, so I get a lot from that, right? But I have never unfortunately, I would say I have never been to Japan or had like a teacher to like teach me basically the ropes. So I had a lot of just bumping to a wall, basically hitting the wall, trying things again and again and again. And there's a lot of information these days, right, on the internet. So I think that that's very helpful. But yeah, I would say that I'm pretty much self-taught. Yeah.
Well, that's something that really speaks a lot, I'm sure, to a lot of our listeners as well, because not a lot of people think that to do great bonsai, you might have to travel to Japan or whatnot. And one of the things I've noticed about your work is that separates it is it has a distinct Japanese quality to it. That's
Oh,
rare, rare amongst
mm.
any professional. So kudos, man. I really enjoy your work.
thanks a lot, Mike. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Yeah, I'm sure that happens with you guys. I don't really think about having a style.
Mm.
I just adapt myself to what is in front of me in terms of whether the tree is a little more wild, wants to be a little more wild, or wants to be a little more classical, more sort of quote unquote Japanese. I follow through with that. But I guess in the end, you cannot escape yourself, right? So in the
Right.
end, you'll have something that people will say, "Oh, that's a Mike Lane tree, or that's an Evan Purdue tree, or that's a Sergio tree, whatever." But yeah, but I don't think of myself having a particular style per se. But
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. You got one for him, Evan?
Oh well, yeah. We're gonna carry right through to the main topic here for the listeners. I think didn't mention it, but did I say we're doing deciduous and Japanese maples
Yeah.
for the cut? Okay, yeah. Uh, sorry, I'm at the nursery right now, in between uh, doing stuff over here. And, there's a lot of things going on, so I apologize for that. But yeah, like we're gonna do a little bit of a dive into some deciduous stuff, but also
great.
since you have a lot of experience with Japanese maples and I'm guessing the climate where you're at in New Jersey it looks like it's pretty optimal for Japanese maples. What are the guidelines that you would say? Like, what's the base level things that we should know about Japanese maples approaching them as bonsai material?
Well, I would say, right, I mean, there's so many things to unpack when you talk about Japanese maples. First of all, is the seasonality, right? And that is also true to a degree with all the deciduous trees, but specifically Japanese maples. you have that wonderful seasonality. There is something interesting, right, throughout the year: spring, summer, fall, winter. So that's something that captivated me, because with Japanese maples you can get that really, really sort of fine structure. It to me is a quintessential um, deciduous species. If you want to do like true deciduous material, I think Japanese maples is hard to beat. But I would say it is very difficult to grow them. When once you go down like south where you guys are, you can still grow them. But part of the beauty of Japanese maples is that you want to have the leaves in good shape so that you can appreciate them in the fall, the fall color, and that's kind of becomes challenging as you kind of go down towards the south, because the leaves, like in Los Angeles, people are trying to grow Japanese maples in Los Angeles. Some of them I know a couple of people that grow them fairly successfully, but for the most part they just get fried. I mean, June comes in and the leaves are just completely toasted. So they become. So I think that, and I think this is true, right? For a lot of the trees that we grow, you need to probably sort of focus on growing things that are either native to your area, or they can grow in that sort of environment well. Obviously, Japanese maples are not endemic to the U.S., but yes, we have in New Jersey, I would say, kind of similar in climate to some areas of Japan. But again, we do get very cold. Where I am, I get, there's stretches in the wintertime where we get 5-10 degrees Fahrenheit, and they need to be protected, right? They can take some hard freezes, but they do need to kind of get protected. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of that fine ramification. But yeah, and for those people out there that is listening to this and love Japanese maples, or they're trying to get into them, I would say by far the best Japanese maple to work with or start with is the what they call straight green Acer palmatum. That is by far the best. Once you start getting into specific cultivars, some of them are true and try cultivars, but there's many that are difficult and they're weak on their own roots, etc. So it may lead to frustration. But I always say Acer palmatum, the green variety, is absolutely the best maple to work with.
That's awesome. And what would be your maintenance aside from repotting around this time? When do you usually start doing like a partial defoliation?
Oh, that's a great question. So partial defoliation, let's see. I usually, although not always, depending on the strength of that particular tree, I usually wait until post hardening, and then I kind of cut back. However, some of them that I have right now, they're pushing so strong that even before the leaves harden off, I'm cutting back, right? I'm doing the partial outer canopy defoliation. So it's like, taking one leaf out of each pair. And oftentimes the one that is left on the tree, I cut usually in half or 3/4, just to allow some air and light inside of the canopy. But yeah, I'm fairly aggressive with some of the trees, because part of the problem is with Japanese maple specifically. Again, you're kind of the goal eventually on a highly ramified tree is that you want that fine ramification towards the tips. If you let them grow too much and then cutting back, what happens is those tips are going to thicken very, very quickly, and you're kind of working against what makes their winter silhouette so beautiful. So I am constantly just kind of taking one leaf off to try to kind of restrain a little bit the strength of those tips.
Right. Awesome. And how many times do you do that in a year, like a partial defoliation? Will you do that like twice?
Yeah. So I do it maybe once on a tree, but then I find myself coming back and taking some. I may have missed some sections, so I go back and I just kind of trim that, etc. So I think for me, maybe I do it pretty much throughout until well into summer, I would say.
That makes a lot of
Mm.
sense. It's very similar to some of our tropicals.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And note for the listeners out there, for partial defoliation or defoliation practices, really want to do this on very healthy trees. We're talking trees like, for instance, we're looking at a Japanese maple. We got to definitely keep in mind the leaves need to be very nice and dark green, or whatever cultivar you're working with. You need that rich color that's expected, given the season. And also we need to make considerations for the state of the root system. So I guess a good question for that too is, if you've just repotted, Sergio, will you see more aggressive juvenile like revert it back to type growth that you need to pinch even further and do more defoliation that year?
First of all, that's a great point that you made, Evan, about the listeners making sure that whatever they do, any kind of work like that, like whether it's partial defoliation or wiring, cutting back, etc., we always have to work with healthy trees. So that's a good point. In terms of the question is in terms of like from repotting, do you see kind of like almost like the tree almost responding back aggressively? Was that sort of the question from you,
Yeah.
Evan?
Is it a
Yeah.
little bit more work, and there's
Yeah.
more defoliation necessary for that?
I would say probably depends. Sometimes the trees from being heavily repotted. I have a sharp pygmy that for example did not like. I did a fairly aggressive repotting. This was I believe it was last spring, last year, and it just did not like it. Now that's a dwarf cultivar, right? With Japanese straight Ace of Palmatum, green maples, they do respond very aggressively. I mean, when you cut back the roots, yeah, sometimes they have a tendency to just kind of like burst quite a bit. Like you see quite a bit of elongation. And again, it depends on the phases where your tree may be, right? So if you're in a development phase, obviously you want to potentially thicken the trunk or thicken some of the primary branches. So obviously you have to let those extensions go, cut them back, and then let it go. And so you repeat that process, you know, over and over the years, over several years. When you're getting into more refined stuff, and that's where the trees demand a lot of work. And I would imagine that that's true for, tropicals and conifers. Is like as the trees get more and more refined, it requires a lot of attention. Again, mainly because those tips are going to start thickening, et cetera, et cetera. So you really have to be on top of that stuff. Certainly with wiring. Although again, there's so much to unpack, right? So when we get into wiring, I like usually when setting up the general structure of a tree, if I'm getting a piece of raw material, with a combination of cutting back and wiring, I like to usually wire my tree sometimes all the way to the tips, to set kind of like the general sort of design or structure. And then for me, the strategy is like as a tree sort of develops, that design settles in. I like to kind of pull back on the wiring and let the natural growth of the tree just take over. I feel, in my opinion, I think if somebody is wiring constantly every single year over and over again for deciduous trees, I think there's something amiss with the approach. I think you should probably be able to pull back eventually. But again, I know that there's several professionals that believe in what they call the clip and grow method, which is totally fine. If it works for them, obviously that's totally fine. For me, I like a combination. I like a good combination of clip and grow and wiring. But eventually, again, as the tree matures, I like to pull back on the wiring. There's always going to be a branch, 2 branches, 3 branches that you want to tweak or something, and then you want to wire that. That's typical, right? That's pretty common. But but doing heavy wiring on a tree that is fairly mature, unless you're resetting the entire design of it, I think that something is probably not right with that approach, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and on the show we've talked about several times about cut and grow versus wiring out, and which one do we think is better? And we've come to the consensus, me, Mike, and Carmen, on previous episode about how, yeah, a little bit of both just to make adjustments, especially. And I agree very firmly with you on that, Sergio, about with deciduous trees especially. I like to get the primaries of deciduous set up, put into place, and then that primary branch structure, given the species, may not be flexible to a certain extent when it gets to a certain caliber, to a certain size. Now I could really get a good bend on a bald cypress branch that's, approaching a good
Right.
size because they're so flexible, but with some
Right.
Japanese maples, they're brittle.
Yeah.
So
The other thing to keep in mind when you're really thinking about ramification too, is that wiring, it only has so much use because you're going to be cutting off so much of the branch to go into the next tapered section.
Yep.
So realistically, like when you ask yourself, what are you wiring for a year? If you wire out too much, a lot of that's going to come back in. So I personally will wire things out and cut that growth off without blinking an eye. I don't look at it as wasted time at times. But I guess my point is that you'll find an approach where you're mixing and matching and using wire and sometimes not using wire, and sometimes, just moving a branch down horizontal and then just using clip and grow from there. And so there's going to be different approaches for every situation that you would kind of come across in bonsai, I think.
Completely agree with that, Mike. Completely agree. I think that there's a diversity of approaches. I think for me, is what has given me the best, more natural sort of results. Not any one technique, not leaning
Right.
heavily into any one technique. I find superior. I think, to your point, is a variety of things, and a little bit of
Ingenuity, a little
ingenuity, exactly.
thinking on your feet.
Creativity,
Yeah.
thinking on your feet, exactly. That also plays a little bit of part into the approach. Yeah,
For
for
sure.
sure, for sure. I work very hard at, and I don't know whether I'm successful at that or not, but I try very much to not make my trees. And this is the whole classic, by now it's cliche, right? The John Naka, make your bonsai look like a tree and not your tree like a bonsai. And I try very hard to make my trees as natural as possible. I want a little bit of naturalness, but I also want something that feels refined. But I try to avoid making my trees look like bonsai. And whenever I smell that, or whenever I'm getting to that sort of like leaning a little heavily into that, I try to change something about the tree to what can I do with it that to get it away from looking like, quote unquote, like too much like a bonsai of sorts. But anyway, yeah.
That's a cool little aesthetic anecdote there. Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
uh,
You never really know how the tree's going to take you, and just being open to different techniques, we're big fans of on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
one thing that I've seen with maples in particular, and then this is something I work with a lot of trident maple, and I've seen people compare trident maple to a Japanese maple kind of treatment. Trident maple is a lot more aggressive, and not nearly as sensitive as Japanese maples would be to some treatments. But the one thing that I look at, and this goes with a lot of acers across like the acer family, is right whenever they're about to start extending their growth. There's actually the internode lengths start out pretty short. If I'm correct on this, with some of the things that you've experienced with Japanese maples, Sergio, they start out relatively short, and you can actually look really close. You see these really nice compacted internode lengths, and then right at like when it's starting to get the good extensions out, you'll get those longer ones that will meet more like an inch to almost 2 inches in not diameter, but length between internode spaces. And internode spaces, for our listeners who are not familiar with that, is that's where the possible buds would be. And you'll actually, on a Japanese maple, it's really hard to pick up because I kind of see some Japanese maples. They kind of ironically look like little bamboo shoots sometimes. It's kind of funny because they'll have really green, very nice green iridescent looking shoots on them sometimes. And you'll see that speed up in growth, and then it'll peter back down again, and you'll see the buds, the internodes get closer again. So, is that something that you have to deal with a lot with your tree, Sergio? Or you know how to combat that?
Yeah, so that's not only a great question, but somewhat of a complicated question
Yeah.
because so first of all, trident maples. I always say that if you're living towards the south of the U.S., I think trident maples are the maples to have. They can sustain a lot of heat, direct sun. I have mine. I only have one trident maple, fairly large trident maple, and I keep it in the full sun all day. And rarely do I get even a leaf that is scorched. I keep it well watered, of course, but in any case, and this is a large tree. So just for the listeners, if you have a small tree like a shohin, probably not the best idea to keep it in full sun all day long. But they can sustain a lot of heat. They're much more vigorous, I would say, than your typical Ace or palmatum Japanese maple. They when they come out, and I think this is sort of what you were saying, Evan. The internodes can be the first and second are fairly short. Then they start getting longer and longer and longer, right? So if you have a large tree, sometimes the slightly bit longer internodes are probably okay in terms of proportion with your tree. Certainly, I think if you have a shohin or something small, you want to keep tabs of that length. For Japanese maples, I find, at least in my experience, I think people say, and I believe it's a misnomer, pinching will result automatically in short internodes. That it has not been my experience, and the reason for that is because I think it's a combination. How did you fertilize the tree perhaps the year before? There's a lot of factors that can play into internode length, even if you pinch it very, very early. I've gotten, and it depends on on the strength of the tree, et cetera, et cetera. Typically, when you have two shoots coming out of the one node, the one tends to be a little shorter, and then the other one tends to be a little bit longer. Again, with pinching, sometimes I can restrain and I can achieve a fairly short internode, an acceptable length. But also I can, even if I pinch it very, very, very early, that internode just keeps on just growing. Perhaps to a degree, it'll end up being a little shorter than if you did not pinch it. But again, it's not an automatic thing, at least in my experience. What I do is once the leaves harden off and I see this very long internode, maybe I would say 2 to 3 inches, depending on the size of the tree, I cut that thing completely off, knowing that I'm going to get buds at that base. It's not even probably, it's guaranteed that you'll get buds on at the base of that. And then weaker shoots will grow out of that, and then you pick one, and actually I pinch that too, and I that's how many times I attain or achieve my short internodes. So there's a lot of that cutting back, letting it grow, pinching, cutting back, et cetera, and little by little. The other thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is that once a tree ramifies heavily, I mean, when a tree has maybe 2 branches, right, is in development, your leaves are going to be huge, fairly huge, and your internodes are probably going to be huge because the tree is trying to kind of like compensate, right? But once it starts dividing that and the tree is spending all that energy among that many more pieces of growth, that's when you'll see also a reduction of the leaf almost automatically. There'll always be, with Japanese maples, there'll always be areas that are very strong, very coarse. You're gonna have to like manage those fairly aggressively. That's even with older specimens. That's gonna happen. That's not uncommon. But as the tree gets older and ramifies, those leaves are gonna start getting smaller and smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it's all good there. And I think we're gonna move on to talking about different cultivars and also on Japanese maples on their own roots versus grafts, which I feel like that could be a whole thing as well.
Right.
But before we get there, I want to go ahead and do a couple of shout outs really quick about our I guess some what sorry. Um just like where to find our stuff on social media and stuff. We usually throw that in the beginning, but we put it in the midpoint now. If you guys want to check out any of the work that me and Mike do, you can head over to underhillbonsai.com, check out articles that I've written. You can head over to Underhill's Instagram page and also Underhill's Facebook page to see what's going on at the nursery, what we have currently available. We supply Southeast Louisiana with bonsai supplies such as soil, tools, wire, pre-bonsai stock all the way up to specimen level. For Mike, you can go over to kitsunebonsai.com and go check out his store and his offerings. Mike's got, I mean, are you running any online classes or anything coming up, Mike?
Nothing online right now. We are doing our local classes. We have a few booked at the Alliance for the Arts that's local, and we also have our brewery class and our winery class. So
yep.
They can go ahead and check those out online.
Yep, and check that out at Mike's website. Mike is in Fort Myers, Florida. So if you're near there, you might be in for a good time. Mike's a great teacher. And then for Sergio, your website is m5works.com.
M5 Bonsai Works.
m5bonsaiworks.com. Go over to Sergio's website. His portfolio of his trees are on there. He's got really awesome photos of his trees. Really good work on those photos. Did you shoot those yourself?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent job. I like the progressions. I like the staging you've done with those trees.
I just want to recreate the lighting you get.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah, my setup is very modest. I would get laughed out of the room with if I worked in there if I show a real professional photographer my equipment, I would get laughed out of the room. But it does what I needed to do. So, but thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, taking pictures of bonsai is not easy, and you have to make a lot of adjustments, especially to show line and twigging. And on those Japanese maples, it's so fine. But yeah, really good display on there. So yeah, let's jump back into it for cultivars. That's something that I'm just now starting to get into with Japanese maples. So is there, I know you said the green is the easiest one to start with, to get to kind of to dip your toes in with Japanese maples. What is your favorite? And then what would be like the cultivar in your opinion? Like the best one?
Sure. Let me think for a second because I have a few, but lately I become a huge fan of the Shishigashira. Let me make a point because before we talked about wiring, right? And while I like wiring my deciduous trees, you have to be careful with some of these cultivars. They're extremely brittle. With Shishigashira, it's almost like working with glass. If you're not careful, you can do some bends, but if you're not very careful, if you're not watching yourself, you'll end up with a whole branch in your hand. They won't crack. They won't give you sort of a heads up. It'll suddenly just snaps, right? So, but Shishigashira is like a wonderful cultivar. It is notorious for growing very, very slow. It ramifies very slowly, but ultimately, once you're there, it's like amazing, just amazing cultivar. Extremely short internodes, almost without even trying. You can fertilize it the hell out of it, basically, and you still will get short internodes for the most part. So wonderful. And of course, we all know that it's got that ruffle kind of texture, which is wonderful. Autumn color, amazing on Shishigashira. The other one that is a favorite of mine, for sure, is the Arakawa. which
I
is
knew it.
rough bark.
Yep. I knew
Yeah,
that was going to be
yeah,
mentioned.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I have to mention that one because that's dear to my heart. Very. I always say that you pretty much get everything with Arakawa. You get the character of the bark. You get the fineness of the ramification that is typical of a Japanese maple, and of course you get the color. The color for Arakawa is almost, again, without even trying hard, in autumn, absolutely incredible. That's the one of my maples that no matter what that year is, whether it's too hot, too cold, too wet, or whatever, always is a great performer in terms of color in the fall. Yeah, fantastic. Now, this is interesting, right? Because and you brought it up, Evan, in terms of like on their own roots. I have a few Arakawas, they're all on their own roots. However, in Japan, and I've seen them in my couple of trees that I did in Japan, I've seen them where they are grafted to regular Aesopalmenum stock. What happens is you end up with a corky bark, right? The rough bark, but the base of it is that silver gray. So it looks rather strange. And not particularly my taste, but I suspect that they're grafted in order to make them more vigorous. One of the things that I've talked to Bjorn about this, and he's seen this in Japan, and this is, I guess this is just part of the cultivar, is that Arakawa, as they age, their apical regions tend to die back. Now I have my twin trunk Arakawa, which is probably the most developed Arakawa that I have. That's probably a tree that is nearing, well, probably about 40 or 45 years old. I have not seen any slowing down of the apical regions, but I am very, very observant of that because I've seen many in the US being sold big trunks, and then all of a sudden the tops are completely chopped off because they die back. So something to be mindful of. Arakawa also has the annoying sort of habit of dropping branches here and there just because. So once again, nothing is perfect, right? So you get the good with the bad as well. But yeah, Arakawa's got to be at the top of my list for sure.
That's
And
awesome.
and Arakawa, just that's like the one you think that's the king for just Japanese maple varieties, basically, huh?
I think that Aesopalmenum straight is probably at the top of my list just because you can do a lot of techniques. You can do thread grafting, you can do root grafting, you can even I have one now where I've done a peg graft.
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Okay, all right, and I don't know, Mike, but I think it is gonna make it.
I think it looked good.
It's looking good. So cross. Just pray for me.
Was that the one in Texas?
In Texas,
I just came from a customer in Texas that had a peg graft prepared, and she was saying she was working on it with you.
oh, you're talking about I won't mention.
Gloria?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's
Yeah,
it.
that looks good. It
Yeah.
looks that one. I don't know if you're talking about a different one, but that one
I'm
looks almost ready.
Yeah, I'm talking about one that I have here in my garden. It's a multi-trunk Aesopalmatum, and I did the peg graft, and it's now in my third year, but it looks really well fused, and I'm about to cut the whole thing off, and I think the branch will survive. So I'm really happy about that. But again, Aesopalmatum you can do a lot of these crazy techniques and very, very quickly even within a season, maybe with the exception of a peg graft that is a little more complicated. But certainly I think you can do root grafting, thread grafting for sure within a season. Now the second one favorite for me probably may have to be Arakawa. Yes, over Shishigashira. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And
the tried and true venerable green traditional Japanese maple is the king.
Yeah, I would
it.
say so. Yes. Yeah. Just because you can do a lot, you can achieve a lot in a short period of time. They're extremely vigorous, et cetera, et cetera. So great maple, especially for those that are starting with maples. highly recommended. Because I see folks are that just getting into it and they immediately go to the fancy varieties.
Right.
And while those are beautiful, right? I would reserve those for when you have a little more experience.
Mm-hmm. For sure. That's awesome.
With the Sharps Pygmy, I'm just kind of looking through your gallery now, just seeing honored finest deciduous bonsai at the fourth U.S. National.
Yes, I think it was the fourth, correct. There's a little funny story behind that.
Mm.
I'm part of the Bonsai Nut. I think you guys know it's a internet forum,
Yep.
and I joined back in 2011. Now I had posted pictures of that Sharps Pygmy, and then all of a sudden, I'm not thinking about showing that tree at all, because I know it needed work and stuff like that. In 2014, I believe it was May, Bill Balvani sends me a message. Hey, would you mind showing this at the U.S. National this September? And when you put it like that, I told my wife, I mean, I cannot say no to Bill. I cannot say, oh, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not gonna show. It's not, the tree's not ready. I mean, the guy has invited me. It's like, okay, I will, regardless of my feelings. I definitely will show up with the tree.
Mhm.
And I mean, anyway, so I exhibited the tree, and it ended up getting the finest deciduous award that year, which was like blew my mind, honestly, because I had not expected any of that, much less even show the tree that year. So it was a great moment for me. I'll be honest. I mean, it was like just blew my mind. Now, let me point out for Sharps Pygmy, now that you brought it up, Evan,
Mhm.
Sharps Pygmy has beautiful variety. It is considered a dwarf variety, but they get very dense extremely quickly. And so what that means is that religiously, every single year without fail, especially when you have a fairly well developed tree with a full canopy, you have to thin it out. You have to thin it out because for sure it gets so dense that the interior areas will surely die back that same year if you don't thin it out. So that is the one thing. That's why I some folks really like the Sharps Pygmy, but I said if you don't have help, I would be cautious about having more than one or two of them because they're a lot of work. A lot of work.
Mhm.
If you have a young tree with 3 branches, not a problem. But when you have something that has a full canopy, there you have to be at it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those very tedious, high maintenance trees, and I do agree. Like, I can only have so many tedious trees in my garden at a time.
They're my favorite.
Oh yeah, and each bonsai practitioner is different in that. Like, Mike can go back there and work with little trees and do little
Yeah.
the picking and the plucking and the cutting back and all that. Whereas I have bigger trees, deciduous trees and stuff that, like, yeah, when you get to it, thinning them out, it's a lot of work, and that's like individual pieces of and leaves and stuff you have to pick out. Uh, like, I'm thinning out my water elm for the ABS show coming up, and it's little things. It's like this one leaf in this one spot is making my canopy feel like too
Yeah.
convoluted, like too crowded right here. So there's little tedious things coming through and doing that. But with this Sharps Pygmy, I can see it. Um, and one of the things, like one of the reasons I also brought it up, I thought it was very interesting that it won finest, because I know for the national show in Rochester, that's a very Bill prefers very traditionally styled trees, and Japanese maple is something that he really invests a lot of time into. That's like I would say that from my experience with Bill, I actually saw him give a presentation in Portland last time I was there on Japanese maples. I would probably say it probably is his favorite species if I had to guess.
I
Um,
would, yeah, I would say so.
yeah, so and I've heard that he prefers very traditional styling. Where I'm looking at this Sharps Pygmy, and you have a naturalistic broom going on, which is not always something that I've talked to a handful of people about developing Japanese maple to this higher level of like these styles of maple, and I've had some opposing opinions on broom style Japanese maples. They say it's more appropriate to do the informal or formal upright kind of styles with them, or clumps or forests. But yeah, a broom is not very common, and that's what I've heard. How do you feel about brooms versus uh, traditional styles?
Sure. So, well, there are certain ones like Kiyohimes. You'll see them often sort of growing in the broom style. So I think that as long as it feels natural, I think it's okay. Uh, One thing I want to point out about that about Bill is that yes, you're right. I think Bill is has definitely a very classical kind of approach to bonsai, but knowing him a bit, what I do also admire about Bill is that he's also open to other approaches. Amazingly enough, as classical and as almost you can say traditional, which is there's nothing wrong with that. Uh, Sort of following the Japanese model, if you will. I've seen him be accepting of approaches that are far from being classical, and yet he accepts them. So I think I admire that because it's not easy, right? We all kind of have our biases, and some folks are like, if it's not traditional, I don't like it. But that's certainly I would not categorize Bill as such. Back to the Sharps Pygmy. Evan, I think that you're right. I think if you look at that tree, the branches it's almost like I would say kind of like yes, you're right. It's almost like a broom, but also like a multi-trunk tree. But if you really analyze a tree, traditionally in Japan, you would have air layer right at the base of those where all those trunks uh, the point where they all come out, you would have air layer to make a more traditional multi-trunk style. But that they come up like 3 or 4 inches up the trunk. So I would say in Japan, definitely that would not fit into their traditional model.
Mhm.
So in that sense, and I think in the US, I think certainly in Europe, we have been able to kind of not beholden necessarily by the traditional Japanese rules. And for example, although I don't do a lot of dead wood in my deciduous, it's more acceptable right in the West, where in
Mm.
Japan, they may take that tree and just throw it out in the garbage can. So again, nothing better or worse. It's just a different kind of approach, different aesthetic, I suppose. And we're not Japanese, right? We're kind of our culture is more of the West. So I think we all have a slightly bit different way of interpreting the art form, essentially.
Mm.
But yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's a beautiful tree, and if you go over to Sergio's site on his m5bonsaiworks.com, it's under the if you go to work and drop down, it's number 5. If listeners are interested, which tree we were just discussing there. Um, so yeah, it's it's awesome. And I also love the let's see, was the pot changed for the yeah, you changed to more of a cream pillar pot for that tree.
Yeah,
Um,
so yeah, it was in a Yamafusa, and I was with Bill in Japan back in I think 2015. We went to see the Taycan 10, and I actually bought it. I had asked Bill, "Hey Bill, you remember that Sharps Pygmy?" He goes, "Yeah, of course." He said, "You think this pot will fit it?" And he goes, "Yeah." So I now it's in a blue pot, Reiho pot, Japanese pot, and
yeah,
I
that
had to
pot's
also
awesome.
yeah, no, yeah, it's very nice. I've gotten compliments, but also people say, I think some people don't like that bright blue. But I think in terms of Japanese maples and pots, I think sometimes color is a great thing for maples. You can be a little more experimental with them, like a sky blue or certainly creams are always a mainstay with maples, but you can go outside of that. You can go into like the blues and some of the turquoise even. So yeah, but I got that pot in Japan.
Mhm.
It's a nice pot. Yeah.
It's and that's something we can kind of get into a little bit before we start wrapping up here is pot selection, like bonsai colors and glazes, well glaze colors. For Japanese maples, that's you know, I've always kind of thought that the glossier and the more showy the maple is, the more loud the pot could be, even if it's a larger tree. Of course, you don't want to be electric colored. You don't want to be electric yellows and electric blue and stuff like that. But yeah, I would love to see more uh highly developed trees like this in these beautiful pots. I don't see any well yeah, the cream's close to a yellow, but there's not a lot of bright yellows. It's something usually reserved for like shohin type
Right.
smaller trees and stuff. But yeah, the but I could see that with the blue, and then you get on to the opening of the shoots, and then maybe into the fall color. That contrast is very sharp.
Yeah.
That red
Yeah.
and that sky blue. But you know, I think it's a great combination. And for choosing bonsai pots for maples, we usually, in your opinion, what's something that you usually go for when you're starting to get to that level?
Well, I mean, I love koyo, right? Koyo, Japanese uh, pots are absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. What I like about Japanese pots is they have a very refined, understated feel to them. That when you put in your tree, again, your tree is your painting, right? And then your pot is almost like the frame. You never really want the frame to take over the painting. You never want to have the viewer say, "Hey, Evan, nice frame,"
Yeah.
and before they say nice painting, right? So, but outside of that, I mean, I think again, Koyos are beautiful. I love turquoise. I think cream always works with Japanese maples. The only point that I want to make here, because I have clients that I've seen where they match an older tree with a very shiny pot. I
Mm,
think that the age of the tree and the age of the pot needs sort of to match, right? So meaning that that pot may have to be a little bit sort of have had glaze that is a little more dull, maybe have a lot of patina to it, so that it matches the age of the tree itself. But I think that there's some wonderful experimentations in Europe, in the US now with color. And I'm talking about larger pots now. We're not talking about Shohin, because to your point, Evan, again, in Shohin, you can be very, very experimental with colors. You can be a lot louder because they're so small, right? But
mm,
in terms of when they're so bigger trees, I think now, they're experimenting now with mixing like blues and reds within the same pot, et cetera, which is really interesting. And I look forward to experiment with some of that stuff, matching my trees with something that is a little bit outside of the norm.
yeah, yeah. I love pottery. I mean, I think this is kind of the podcast of the pottery nerds over here too. So I know Mike, you get into a lot of fancy pottery for your stuff too.
Do yeah, I'm pretty. I don't know. I'd say I'm 90% Japanese and probably 10% other stuff. But because
Yeah.
like Sergio said, there's certain understated qualities that most Japanese pots have that it's I'm not going to say it's hard to find on Western pots, but there seems to be this quality that I can't explain it on every pot, but it seems very limited in the potters in the West that kind of can recreate that kind of
Mm,
Japanese feel. And we're also a lot younger in the game, so that'll probably change in time. But I really, I'm would say I'm pretty obsessed with pots.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's half the show.
it's
Um,
half the show.
but yeah, yeah, I think that's good to kind of go towards the last segment of our show. We usually do our bonsai word of the week. and it's usually something we just touch lightly on, so we don't have to deep dive too much. But yeah, just like wrapping up Japanese maples for a moment there. I know there's so much more to be said. Like we just did an azalea episode, the last episode with me and Carmen, and I mean, I had to like stop Carmen for a second. I'm like, wait, we're going really long on this. So yeah, but yeah, we can revisit. Like we always take listener questions. So if you guys have listened to this point in the episode, thank you so much for listening this far in. If you have questions, please drop them into the Patreon page or email me at evan@underhillbonsai.com. We can revisit questions about Japanese maples and azaleas in particular. So I know an hour is barely enough time to wrap it up, but Sergio, did you have any closing statements about Japanese maples before we move on? Just real, if you can make it quick.
I mean, quintessential deciduous tree, right? So you will not be, I think, disappointed with working with maples. And believe it or not, they're easy. They're easy to grow. Believe it or not, especially the Acer palmatum. Straight Acer palmatum, very very easy to go, but easy to grow. But again, quintessential deciduous tree. Just yeah. But
It's up there with like the Shimpaku juniper and the Japanese white pine. I mean, it's one of the trilogy. I mean, the Trinity.
yeah, the Holy Trinity, sure. That's
Yep.
why I believe the black pines are usually called the kings of bonsai, and Aso and the Japanese maples are the queens, right?
Yeah.
They have that more feminine kind of sort of look and feel. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Sergio. So the bonsai word of the week, and it's not necessarily because a lot of our words have been just straight Japanese terms based off of actual words that I consider to be poetic to what, like there's just that one word that describes something in bonsai. So we're gonna kind of back off of just doing like the straight stuff, like where it's like mochokome and kusamono and yamadori. This time we're going to talk about something I feel like needs to be brought up a little bit more often, so we can kind of get some key differences in this word here is pre-bonsai. And so I feel like a lot of young bonsai practitioners confuse the bonsai stock, like so you have your established bonsai tree, and then and I experienced this at the nursery. I'm over here at the bonsai nursery in Folsom, Louisiana, and we have people looking for pre-bonsai stock. So from what I have kind of studied into developing bonsai here at the nursery is pre-bonsai stock, and you guys can chime in after to give your opinions on this. I think it's a little bit of a controversial term, and it's used very lightly in some cases, unfortunately. But from my experience, pre-bonsai means that your tree, it is a realized form and style, and it's basically one repot away from moving into a realized bonsai. And I feel like that's confused with raw stock sometimes. And so there's a fine line there, but I feel like it's a little confused. So what do you guys think?
Well, I think at the nursery at Weigert's, what we would denote as a pre-bonsai is something that has had one like root reduction down to a bulb pan and has usually been pruned to have lots of low branches and be like a little dense shrub. So I think, to me personally, if I've put in the time to select branches and like actually wire stuff out and start to grow it as an actual trained tree, to me, if I'm bringing it in during a freeze, it's a bonsai. Yeah. Other than that, it's a plant.
Yeah. Good. Where does it cross over from plant to pre-bonsai for you, Sergio?
Oh man, yeah. I think Mike said it best.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I can add any more to what Mike said. That's exactly how I feel. Yeah.
When it becomes like your baby and it becomes
That's
valuable.
that's exactly right. There's something about it that's like it becomes a bonsai. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So it's that approach. Yeah. I want the listeners to consider pre-bonsai stock versus raw stock. And it's something that we all, starting out, your day one getting interested in a bonsai, and maybe you turned on this podcast and you're like, oh yeah, this sounds awesome. Get into some Japanese maple, and you're like, where do I even start? Learning what pre-bonsai stock is will get you a long way. Because you can go down to any garden center anywhere and find Japanese maples, and you'll find them on, sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll find them on their own root, and maybe you can grow that plant into a great bonsai tree one day. Or you find a reputable bonsai nursery, and there's going to be one. I think there's good bonsai nurseries just about in every state that I can think of in the United States. And then of course we have listeners all over, so just check around and see what you got. But I mean, those are usually the best places to find your free bonsai stock. I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to make a point on it, and I should do a whole episode separate from my little rant right here. But yeah, there's a line there. And developed, refined bonsai. There, nothing beats that. But yeah, it's kind of like we were mentioning earlier. It's the newness, the new bonsai that's becoming valuable. That's kind of what that sweet spot you're looking for pre bonsai stock. But anyway, so yeah, Sergio, thanks for being on the show. Is there anything else going on that we should know about? Are you gonna be doing any workshops, demos, shows, anything soon?
I just came from Toronto, and I will be, yeah. So I'll be doing a few local ones, but I think an exciting one is coming for me in late August. I'll be doing something in Germany.
Oh, sweet.
Awesome.
With Mr. Walter Powell and Jennifer Price. So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, I try to have keep up with my workshops and whatnot, but again, yeah, this was a lot of fun, guys. Again, big fan, and I'm honored to that you guys thought of me to be part of your podcast.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah,
all right,
no
be
worries.
well, and bonsai on, man.
Yeah, you too, man.
Bonsai on. Love it.
Bonsai on, Sergio. We'll talk to you soon, okay, buddy?
Thank you. All right, man.